Hello, I'm Peter Fingar, and as a former CIO and college professor, I've been working at the intersection of business and technology for almost 40 years. You could say this grandpa has seen it all from the very beginning, so I don't pay much attention to the constant stream of hype that comes from the IT industry. But now and then, something game-changing comes along and I devote my full attention. Well, today we are witnessing a seismic shift in information technology, the kind that comes about every decade or so, and it will have a huge impact on business, especially in today's dire economy. It's called the cloud, a 21st century business platform built on cloud computing technologies. And cloud computing is set to unleash a perfect storm in business.
One thing I'd like to do is put you to work. Would you please stand up and stretch? And you might want to shake the hand of your neighbor and get introduced. All right, sit down and shut up. We've got work to do. First of all, some of the topics I'm talking on today are all related to time. Time, that variable we all have to deal with. As Peter Drucker once said, time is the scarcest resource of all. But I don't know much about time, so I took a clue from Clint Eastwood. And I've got a chair here that's occupied by Father Time. So Father Time, from time to time, I want to crank back the time machine and sometimes go forward. So, that ancient Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times. Was that a proverb or was it a curse? We can never tell, but I will tell you that 2012 is definitely a most interesting year. You know, some people think it's the beginning of the end. What happens on December 21st? The Mayan apocalypse. We'll get back to that later. So while it might be the beginning of the end and it might be doomsday, on the other hand, 2012 is a very exciting year for me. This is the 10th anniversary of that little book we wrote, Business Process Management, the Third Wave. By the way, you'll see I'm much older than the avatar. 10 years goes by real quick. So it might be not the beginning of the end, but I'd like to talk to you about the end of a new beginning. So, Father Time, process is the buzzword here. Can you take us way back to 1920? Thank you. There's a word called management. Management was not always around. It was invented by these three guys. You got Frederick Taylor, you got Alfred Sloan, and you got Peter Drucker. They created this thing in the 20s called management. And then later, after World War II, a couple of guys named Deming and Duran went to Japan and taught them about quality, statistical quality, if you will, total quality management. While the word management itself related to process, the processes were implicit. What happened with the TQM movement is we didn't make new processes, but we applied statistical analysis to improve processes. And look at the change that made on the world as far as quality management. Then, 10 years after the Duran and Deming books, came that infamous book, Re-Engineering the Corporation. How many of you read that or know about it? You know, it just swept the world. And it created this thing called Business Process Re-Engineering, BPR. What is that? You younger people here may not remember that term, but I bet all of us remember the term downsizing. Well, Hammer was from MIT and he was into this office automation stuff, and their idea together was, wait a minute, instead of the handoffs we make between all the departments in an enterprise, why can't we use office automation types of technologies to tear down those silos? And that's exactly what happened. They re-engineered and transformed companies with the Big Bang approach that today is embedded in your ERP systems. Now, ERP was fine. It transformed companies, but once those processes were configured, they were then cast in concrete. So I met this guy named Howard Smith from CSC. By the way, I'm not very good on technology. I keep finding these people real smart. And Howard Smith sat down and explained to me what we need to do is not just have ERP. And ERP, by the way, is application and data. Why don't we take the idea of process and make an abstract data type out of it and make it the center of automation? And that led to the BPMS, the Business Process Management System. It was not built to last, it was built to change. That was 10 years ago. And I'm disappointed in a lot of things because a lot of companies have just used BPMS to automate back office. And that ain't what it's about. But what it really is about is automating entire companies and being able to fluidly change those processes on the fly. Well, now, the big challenge, I met another smart guy. He's the Chief Innovation Officer of Dell, the computer company, Jim Steichletter. And we looked where it's going to go for the next 10 years and came up with the book, Business Innovation in the Cloud. Because now we're taking not just an enterprise, we're taking the entire value chain and building multi-company network, virtual network enterprises. Companies don't work alone. I'll repeat this later, but there's an average of 20 companies in any given value chain. So what are they going to do? Is there going to be an 800-pound gorilla controlling all the suppliers? No, we're going to start building these process capabilities in the cloud. Now, in our book, we wanted to look out and look at how we do innovation in the cloud. But the problem with doing that is you can't jump into the technologies. You have to start with context. What's going on in the world today? You've got to look at the social, the economic, the technological environments. You've got to look at some of the big shifts. We live in a hydrocarbon economy today, and that's going to change. It has to change, because we can't keep drilling the earth for all the billions of people that are coming online. So if you look at this guy on the bottom left, he's developed an artificial leaf at MIT that one day could bring hydrogen to the forefront of energy. On the other hand, energy plus communications are how the world changes. You know what allowed this thing called democracy to happen? The printing press. That way you could send information out and entire populations could become informed. Today, as we said earlier, is one shared world. So we're seeing a shift that's going to happen in both energy and communications. And that's the kind of context. The other thing, and Father Time might not be able to help us too much on this, but is this thing called change. Change itself is changing. And what do I mean by that? This lady is in the state next to us. She's still alive. Her name's Bessie Cooper. She was 8 years old when the Wright brothers took off. Look at the change Bessie has seen. And we're going to find out that what she's seen in our lifetimes, we're going to see many times more change than even Bessie Cooper has seen. Because here's how it works. It's called exponential growth, the exponential curve, exponential change. Notice at the bottom, we change slowly, slowly, slowly. But once you hit the knee of that curve, it takes off like a rocket. Just to give you an example, this is me much younger. And the guy I'm talking to is the inventor of the electronic digital computer, John Vincent Adanasoff. Look at the change I've seen in my little life, and I'm not that old. I was around talking to the guy who invented the computer. 1956. You know what that is? It's a 1-ton hard drive being loaded into a Pan American airline to be delivered to IBM for their first supercomputer, the RAMAC. That hard drive has 5 megabyte data capabilities. I've got 24 gigs right here in my pocket. That's the kind of change we're talking about. The exponential change is not just in technology, it's this information explosion, the number of mobile devices, the human population. Do you know how many humans were on the planet when Jesus Christ walked the earth? About 150 million people. How many today? We're up that curve. We got 7 billion. By 2050, we're talking 9 billion. So exponential change is across the board. In terms of biotechnology, nanotechnology, we ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, just look at the last 10 years or so. We've really transformed from atoms to bits. Even Van Gogh now is no longer a static thing in a museum in the Netherlands. It's alive. But we're also going to see going from bits back to atoms. With things like 3D printing, it's going to revolutionize manufacturing. So essentially, the whole notion of technology is not just automating and going digital and going virtual. We're also going to see it turn around, and we're going to move from bits back to atoms in a number of areas. So change wants to happen. And one of the key things about change, we want change. We want change that we can understand. But things are getting so complex, we're going to find that smart everything is going to happen. Even in terms of business process management, you're going to start hearing the word intelligent BPM. You're going to see the rise of what we call autonomous intelligent agents. They're not going to take over the world. What they're going to do is help us manage the complexity. How many of you ever typed on a word processor, like a Word document? Did you know you have a software agent back there looking over your shoulder? When you misspell a word, it catches you. That is a software agent. Well, software agents can be simple like that, all the way up to handling very complex, knowledge-oriented activities.
It's amazing. And we're not amazed. It's really amazing that all this stuff is here. Okay? It's in 5,000 days. All this stuff has come. First of all, we have all these things in our hands. We think they're all separate devices, but in fact, every screen in the world is looking into the one machine. These are all basically portals into that one machine. The second thing is that some people call this the cloud, and you're kind of touching the cloud with this. And so in some ways, all you really need is a cloud book. And the cloud book doesn't have any storage, it's wireless, it's always connected. There's many things about it. It becomes very simple. And basically what you're doing is you're just touching the machine, you're touching the cloud, and you're going to compute that way. So the machine is computing. And in some ways it's sort of back to the kind of old idea of centralized computing. The web is in some sense kind of like a black hole that's sucking up everything into it. The point is that everything will have embedded in it some sense of connecting it to the machine. So you begin to think of a shoe as a chip with heels and a car as a chip with wheels. And the other thing about this embodiment is that there's kind of what I call McLuhan reversal. McLuhan was saying machines are the extensions of the human senses, and I'm saying humans are now going to be the extended senses of the machine in a certain sense. So we have a trillion eyes and ears and touches. We think about the dependency that we have on this other technology called the alphabet and writing. We're totally dependent on it. It's a transformed culture. We cannot imagine ourselves without the alphabet and writing. And so in the same way, we're going to not imagine ourselves without this other machine being there. So the next 5,000 days, the single idea that I wanted to leave with you is that we have to begin to think about this as not just the web only better, but a new kind of stage in this development. It looks more global. If you take this whole thing, it is a very big machine, very reliable machine, more reliable than its parts. But we can also think about it as kind of a large organism. And so we might respond to it more as if this was a whole system, more as if this wasn't a large organism that we are going to be interacting with. It's a one, and I don't know what else to call it than the one. To do, action, takeaway. So, here's what I would say. There's only one machine, and the web is its OS. All screens look into the one. No bits will live outside the web. To share is to gain. Let the one read it. It's going to be machine readable. You want to make something that the machine can read. And the one is us. We are in the one. I appreciate your time.
So that was Kevin Kelly, the guy who founded Wired Magazine, and we've talked about this accelerating change, and I just love the way he puts it. It's amazing, but we're not amazed. So that kind of sets the context of how the world is changing, but what is this other thing called the cloud? What in the hell is cloud computing? Asked Larry Ellison a few years ago. It's complete gibberish. It's insane. When is this garbage going to stop? Of course, he was out buying up cloud computing companies, and he wanted to let everyone else know this was insane and crazy. But by the way, Larry was not all wrong. There is no such thing as the cloud. It's not a new technology. It's not a new methodology. It's not a new architecture. But what is it really? It's a new delivery mechanism. It's what the internet was meant to be in the first place. A network of networks of machines and networks, accessible to everyone, everywhere on the planet. So when we look at definitions of the cloud computing, here's from NIST. You've got your infrastructure services, that's the data centers. You've got the platforms, that's where your software types are building applications and other software. And then the delivery, software as a service. Now my definition, I wrap around that BPM as a service. Because software, like SaaS, we think of as an application. BPM as a service is that changeable thing. We're going to take the BPMS into the cloud, and it's going to be shared by multiple companies. And the key is rapid elasticity. You don't have time to hang around and do long-range planning anymore. You need to act. I mean, look at how the world is competing for this tablet market. 2 months ago was the latest. This month, it's all brand new. In fact, Google just today announced 3 new tablets. So, did you just say put my business in the cloud? By the way, that's where I live, a little star there. Well, yes, and here's the reason. Because it's not on-demand technology that counts. It's all about on-demand business innovation. Today there's one rule, innovate or die. Well, what is innovation? Don't look. Can you tell me who invented the light bulb? It was not Edison. He stole it off this Brit. Who invented the computer? You know, poor Adanasoff never made a dime. There's a big difference between invention and innovation. They're both about something new, but an invention is making something new. An innovation is making something new that changes the marketplace or that changes society. And that's the key to it. And the real key to doing innovation, as Edison did say, it's 1% inspiration and creativity, and it's 99% perspiration, doing the work. And innovation doesn't crawl along step at a time. Someone comes into an industry and exercises creative destruction. Things come in and the old players are basically gone. You can see this in a number of industries. And again, putting the context together, finally, we've got to look at the bigger change at the macroeconomic level. That guy up at the top there is the CEO of Mercedes-Benz. And Mercedes is pushing a new program for ride sharing because they want to go green. And people say, wait a minute, that's ride sharing, that's socialist, that's communist. And he says at the big expo, if it is, viva la revolution, with Che Guevara in the background. We're seeing the Great Recession. Great Recession might be just kicking into a real depression. We don't know. The change coming at us is fast and it's furious. The world is flat. And we're seeing the rise of commune capitalism. You know, those red Chinese, they're a bunch of communists kicking our butt in the capitalist world. It's a new form of competition. It's state capitalism. And that changes our world of business. So there's a lot of big sets of change out there that we really described in the first part of the book. And the result is innovate or die. Well, how do you do that? The second half of the book is what are the new ingredients that go into this thing called innovation? Remember the story of Stone Soup? The soldiers coming back from the Napoleonic Wars, pulls into a village and says, may I spend the night? They go, no, we have no food here. says, that's not a problem. And there's a famine. That's not a problem. He goes to his cart, brings out a big kettle, lights a fire, puts water in it, throws a stone in it. Starts going, Then one of the villagers comes out and brings some carrots. Another. By the end of the day, they all had a huge feast because they created this stone soup. And if you want to innovate, you've got to do some stone soup ingredients of your own. And you'll find in your slide set, if you go out to that website, you can Google around some of the new words related to innovation, such as cognitive computing, such as TRIZ, things you may not have been familiar with in the past. But let's talk about some of these key ingredients. One is all about this word that is so much BS called agility. What is agility? Is it a poster you put up in your break room? No, there was a guy named John Boyd who was a fighter pilot trainer who created a mathematical formula for this thing called agility. And what he created was using this mathematics, what are called OODA loops. His theory of energy maneuverability was used in the design of the F-16 fighter plane motor. And guess what? The F-16 doesn't have the range of a MiG, it doesn't have the speed, it doesn't have the capability of the payload. But the F-16 wins every time because it does have mathematically provable agility. So what we're beginning to see now is this whole notion of OODA loops, observe, orient, decide, and act, replacing what used to be strategic long-range planning. As Walt Schill of McKinsey once said, strategy as we know it is dead. Today it's all about operational agility. And if you have to change your strategy monthly, so be it. That's the new reality in business. And there are technologies behind the concept of agility that can be applied. We need to innovate innovation itself. You know, 96% of innovation fails. It's kind of like we're back in the age of liniments and potions in medicine. Well, the whole notion then is we've got to innovate innovation itself and make it a repeatable process, a repeatable business process. We've got to have foresight. We've got to have insight. We have to bring these things together in terms of strategic planning and looking at reference architectures within our industry. So we've got to be systematic about innovation as a repeatable business process. Now, innovation, we used to think in the past there was an R&D lab where some geniuses got together. No. Innovation now is open innovation. Cast a wide net. Look to the edge. Open innovation is, instead of inside out pushing things to market, it's going to the edge and looking at customer needs, and that's what drives innovation. It's open and it's outside in. It's about exploiting the strength of weak ties. We hang around with people who think like we do. You need to hang around people also who don't think like you do, and that's the power of weak ties. Again, it's all customer driven. If you look at this chart, it's all about punctuated equilibrium. The punctuated equilibrium is happening faster and faster. If something new is introduced, the demand for it's there, then the competition catches up. It's a continuous cycle, as we all know. Social networks. Here's one thing I find really interesting. As Kevin Kelly said, we're not interested in connecting to other computers. You are the web. You power Google. When you do searches, that changes the page ranking. So I'd also propose, like Kevin Kelly said, you are the cloud. That's what people go to cloud computing for, is to reach other people and not just computers. But here's one that's kind of fascinating. You have a company called Intrepid. It's working with the U.S. military. And they can go out and listen to these social media. They could go, for example, to Afghanistan and listen to the chatter going on Twitter. By the way, listening to these social networks, companies like Gatorade, they have command posts where they're listening, and they throw what they're hearing through predictive analytics, and then they turn around and unleash sock puppets, drones, and trolls. So here I am at MacDill Air Base here in Tampa, and I'm listening to these conversations in Afghanistan, And someone says, ooh, the Americans just blew up a mosque. What do these guys do? They unleash a troll that goes out into that conversation. And it has all the technical audit trail to make it look like a real person. No, it wasn't them. It was the Al-Mufti Taliban that did it. So we're going to see these things of fake people and conversations going on, and it's going to be a very confusing world. You know, we used to be brainwashed with one-way communications like television. Now it's multi-way. So it's going to be a very interesting world of analytics, sock puppets, and drones. Collective intelligence. There is so much information out there, you've got to separate out the noise versus signal. And up at MIT, they've developed this fantastic system called the deliberatorium. Okay, you've got all this outside-in information and social networks. How do you then focus down and get past the noise and get down to the beef? So it's something very interesting, because what it does then is allow you to take the power of weak ties where you learn new things, but then turn over to the power of strong ties where you want to act on those things. That's when you bring together the experts in a particular area to actually build new things. So look for the deliberatorium. Intel and other companies are already using the software. But here we are at this conference. It's about process. Well, if you look at process, we need to look at innovation in process management. And just as I said earlier, we're crossing from just back office BPM to looking out at the entire value chain. We're going to end up with not a cloud, but what I call the inner cloud, interacting clouds. You know, as Peter Drucker said a long time ago, it's not the newcomer that manages itself, it's the newcomer who can manage its entire cost proposition across the value chain that changes industries. So, how many of you studied Michael Porter in school? Value chain analysis, the big fat arrow. You buy stuff, you add value, and you sell it for a margin. Here's what Porter looks like today. Uh-oh, no more big fat arrow. You've got to manage multiple simultaneous value chains. Some of those might be so small, they're only going to impact one customer. Other of those value chains are going to impact an entire market. So here's what it looks like now. Here's an inner cloud. There's my company in the center. We're interacting with Flextronics in Singapore. We're using Workday Human Capital Management. Ooh, a swarm happens at Facebook, and our new product, the sunglasses phone, takes off. The entire value chain has to be able to react. So we move from chains, by the way, to webs. It's a value web of resources. It's business to business networks. Okay, how do you get there with this notion called innovation? Well, I said it had to be a process. There's many different types of processes that companies are using. This, for example, is from PricewaterhouseCoopers. There's the discovery phase where you're looking at all the possibilities. You then start incubating some of those. Then you narrow it down to 3 and start launching. Then you have to be able to scale up. These are the components of a repeatable process. Here's Gartner's view on the same thing. Here's, and you'll see it in your handouts, the same kind of view where you start looking at the OODA loops. How do we go through these steps and be able to repeat them as necessary as we change the environment with an innovation? Innovation is a team sport. Now, here's the new stack. As a team sport, we're changing the support we need for doing innovation. Notice at the bottom, we still have our legacy IT systems, but we're changing up to the top. We're moving into collaboration and problem solving. So as you move up the chain, you end up with mastering the unpredictable, adaptive case management. And by the way, Mr. Swenson is here giving a talk today. He's the fellow who put that book together. So we're talking more about how do you bring some kind of control to collaboration. You can't just all get out there and start yelling. You've got to be goal-oriented. And Keith Harrison Berninski's book is all about goal-oriented design for collaboration. So if we go up the stack, the new world of IT ends up, it's built for change, the systems are built for people to interact, and they're built for processing. So this is your new IT stack going forward. Big data, I'm not going to tell you anything about big data, except big data is the biggest thing to happen to business since the internet. you go find out why if you don't already know. Here's one I think most of you will like. The big change coming is the end of management. At least the end of management as we know it today, because we're moving from command and control to connect and collaborate. Ken Thompson in Ireland wrote a book called Bioteams. If you're familiar with biomimicry, that's where you copy patterns in nature to build new stuff. Well, what Ken did was copy the communications patterns in nature to then find the first principles of how humans can communicate more effectively when they're working in those virtual networks. Very interesting book called Bioteams by Ken Thompson. So wait a minute, we're not going to, what is this, get rid of management? We got to have management control. Where does it come from in this new world? Through transparency. People can see what you're doing. You're measuring yourself against your peers, like athletes in basketball or whatever. What's the control? Their averages. They all know how they're doing. So transparency will be the key to maintaining a control. And there's an interesting movement going on from Gary Hamel, who's kind of the next Peter Drucker, called the Management Innovation Exchange. And I would definitely look at your notes and check out what they're doing. They're looking, how do we reinvent management itself? Because all this is about people. We're not just reinventing management, we've got to reinvent the people that do the work. And Jim Boots is here today, and he'll be talking about a case study that will blow your socks off, because it's not about the tools and techniques. It's about one of the world's largest corporations went through to move to strategic business process management. I like his name, by the way, Jim Boots. The book is about boots on the ground, doing BPM in the real world where it's tough and you've got human things to deal with. And since we are talking about people with this transparency, you better have this notion called integrity. You can no longer be mean and dirty bad company. You better have integrity, because the transparency is there. They can see you and they can see what you're doing. And this book just came out 3 days ago. It's called Samurai Business. And it's all about applying the first principles of the self-discipline of the samurai. And it's needed in every profession. I'll let you just skim through some of the key concepts. I like the last one the best. Take care of yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you ain't got nothing to offer nobody else. These principles are not the blood and guts of the samurai, but it's a self-discipline that creates these special people. And I want each and every one of you to be special people, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Services innovation. Wait a minute. Services, that's call centers, and you can't automate that. Well, look how the world has changed. Up at the top left is the U.S. My great-grandparents worked on a farm, along with 90-some% of the rest of the population. Whoops, then came the industrial age, and they all moved to the city and worked in the factory. Whoops, all that went to China. Today, in the U.S., only about 9% of employment is in manufacturing. What do we do today? 85% of it is in services. Uh-oh, we got a problem. This is the most dangerous man in America. Just as we apply science and technology to agriculture so that 2% of the population feeds us now, just as we applied it to industrial manufacturing activities, this guy at Watson Research Center wants to apply science and technology to services. Uh-oh. What are we going to do when we only need 2% of the population to deliver services? Well, Milton Friedman, a classical economist who started the Chicago School of Economics, a laissez-faire, keep the government out, let companies do their own thing, proposed when this state is reached that we create a NIT. You're going to like this. What's a NIT? it's a negative income tax. If everything's automated, including services, someone's got to buy the stuff. So your job will be to sit home and they're going to send you a check so you can go buy it. So that's the future if we really do our job here at this conference today. And we're seeing changes in terms of services as far as IT services. You know, in the 50s, computing was so complicated that little companies like Computer Sciences rose up to help companies handle all these big mainframe computers. Well, today we're going to see the rise of what's called a cloud broker. How many of you are working with clouds right now? Ain't easy. And it's not just one cloud. It's not just putting data up into Amazon services. Interacting clouds, as we saw earlier, you're going to have the rise of what used to be a software integrator, a systems integrator, and you can see the rise of what are called cloud brokers. I know one or two of them are here in the audience today because I know who they are. The CIO. When I grew up, wrote my first computer programs, the word programmer was the only thing around IT. I think the word information technology came about when we started putting together the telephone systems along with our back office mainframe systems. Today we have this concept of the Chief Information Officer. What's the future of that person? Well, I would propose to you that because the CIO has the broadest view of the entire company, has a wider systems view, the CIO, who's not a back-end running the air conditioner machines in the data center, but the pure CIO is very likely to be the next CEO, because that is where the expertise is building up to have complete system-wide views of your company. Now here's one that will definitely be a heads up for you. You know, what's the difference between enterprise architecture, business architecture, IT architecture? There's architecture words everywhere. But I'm telling you, because of the complexity of the world we're moving into, the next phase, and the literature is just starting now, will be on fractal enterprise architecture, using the tools and techniques from fractal geometry, because you cannot model a shoreline, you cannot model a cloud using linear geometry. So look for the advance of fractal architecture related to our businesses. So again, I'll repeat it one more time. The wow is not about on-demand IT, it's about on-demand business innovation. And as we wrap things up, we do live in interesting times. You know, Father Time can tell you what's coming. I can't, and he won't give us any secrets. But basically, go read Jared Diamond's book. It's about collapse. We're at the edge of collapse of the world we know today, as other civilizations have collapsed. And in his book, he researches Toynbee, who talks about the rise and fall of civilizations and societies. And it's a good, strong argument how we're on the cusp of the next collapse. On the other hand, keep it balanced. We got this guy, Peter Diamandis, who created the X Prize and is involved in Singularity University. His new book is called Abundance. You know, we're going to have wars over water. It's already kind of happening. Well, guess what? The Earth is 70% water. Well, there's people doing technology that's cost-effective where you get all the water you want. You can turn the ocean into good, clean water without building huge desal plants. So what Peter does in his book is go through and look at energy, to look at natural resources, to look at education. That's another one that's going to change big. How many of you ever heard of the Khan Academy? Well, if you haven't, you got kids, write it down. K-H-A-N, Khan Academy. That's where education is going to be going, one-on-one, tailored to the individual versus a factory style, stick them in a big classroom. So we've got choices to make as humans. We're going to have a collapse, but out of every collapse, something new arises. And that's your job, because you're the folks who are in the middle of your organizations. Ajit Bacchus, I like his book about Beyond the Crisis. He uses the Chinese term, which is arguable, which basically means crisis is danger and opportunity. So here we are in 2012, back to that apocalypse we talked about earlier. Apocalypse doesn't mean the end. If you look at what the Mayans were saying, it's the lifting of the veil to a whole new era. Right now, we're lifting the veil to a whole new era of computing technologies in the cloud, which will transform how societies and businesses operate. So it's not the beginning of the end, it's the end of a new beginning. Yesterday was the internet, tomorrow it's going to be the inner cloud. This is what you folks have to build because you are, what do you call yourselves? BAs, business architects? There's some architecture for you. We've got our legacy at the bottom, but we now have new pillars to build this thing called the extended agile enterprise. We've got to incorporate social networks. Supply and demand chains become networks, not linear chains. Next generation analytics. We've got a lot of business rules and decision-making experts here at this conference. Distributed policy management is going to be ever more important as we scatter beyond the walls of our existing corporations. Capability management, and of course we've talked about making innovation a business process that's repeatable. So there's your challenge. You want to be a business analyst, that's what you got to build. How are you going to do it? Well, as Drucker also tells us, the best way to predict the future. By the way, I've never been wrong in a prediction, except about the future. But the best way to predict the future is to create it. It's in your hands. Why? Because what can be done in the cloud will be done. So the question you have to ask yourself, are you going to be the doer or the one done in through creative destruction? And I would leave you with a final note. Welcome to the end of the beginning of a whole new age. And we don't know what to call it. We had the agricultural economy, the industrial economy. I don't know what to call this yet. So for now, let's call it the apocalypse economy. And we need the integrity of you as a warrior out there to change this world. It's not going to change at the top. People like the Koch brothers who run the coal industry, they want their power. They don't want to give up coal for these new energies. The people at the bottom are helpless. It's the middle out. It's the middle of the organization, not just the corner suites and not the folks down at the teller machine. It's you. You have our futures in your hands. So I would just say, hopefully, may the samurai force be with you. Thank you.